Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Got quite a variety of guests for you today. First of which is a gentleman by the name of John Guandolo, and he's written extensively about an interesting question, and that is, will Islam become the dominant faith or philosophy in Europe, and could it come across the pond to the United States? Well, let's talk to John about that today. But today we have a very special guest with us. John Guandolo, is with us. He's the founder of UnderstandingTheThreat.com. By the way, you may want to jot that down, UnderstandingTheThreat.com, and go to his website. He's a counter-terrorist expert and former FBI agent. He also co-authored the book Sharia, The Threat to America, and he's now authored a book, Raising a Jihadist Generation, and I guess that's due to be released any time. Is that right, John?
That's correct.
When's that coming out?
We're hoping in about the next 5 weeks.
Good for you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, there's a lot going on here, and we're watching Europe with all of its interesting problems by allowing the Islamization, I guess, of Europe. And is that coming to America, you think?
Well, yes, and I believe it's already here. I think a lot of the things that we're seeing in Europe, we're seeing the real conflict between the government entities and the Islamic community on the street. But a lot of the things that are happening there in Europe specifically are happening here. I mean, we have had, just like they had in England, vehicular jihad, where Muslim jihadis drive over people or attempt to drive over them to kill them. We've had beheadings here in the United States. We've had honor killings, and we certainly have, as Raising a Jihadi Generation explains, a significant support network here in the United States that exists to raise and support these jihadi operations.
Now, what happened in Europe? Why did they allow it to go so far? I mean, I even heard rumors where they're allowing even the practice of Sharia law. How can that happen, coincide with parliamentary rule?
Well, that's a great question, and one of the things, one of the strategies that what the other side calls the Global Islamic Movement, it's primarily led by a group called the Muslim Brotherhood, which I would suspect a lot of your viewers have now heard of after what's gone on in Egypt and Libya and Syria and elsewhere in the world. But the Muslim Brotherhood runs the most prominent organizations, Islamic organizations in the United Kingdom. So when they advise the leadership of the British government on how to deal with the Islamic community, you actually have the enemy that just happens to be wearing a suit and a smile explaining to the British leadership how they should conduct counterterrorism operations. But the people the individuals that the British government are leaning on are themselves jihadis. It's an absolutely crazy situation. So the way they intend to impose and are imposing Sharia isn't necessarily by parliamentary rule. It's by imposing it and doing things like saying, as a national policy in some of these countries, you can't say anything defamatory against Islam because it's offensive. And while that may sound okay on the surface, what it's actually doing is stifling the thousands of years of free speech that the Western world has observed. But that's how it's being implemented. And by the way, that's being done here in the United States as a matter of policy as well.
Yeah, I want to come to that. But one more question on Europe. Do you think they'll begin to push back? Do you think there'll be a pushback, and can it be effective in Europe?
There is pushback. There are a couple countries, Germany and France come to mind, where the governments are actually more aware of the threat than in other European countries, and they are actually starting to do things to push back on the Islamic community, certainly the leaders of the Islamic community, who in those countries are also Muslim Brotherhood. But you also have citizen groups that are very angry about how far the government's allowed it to go. The problem is, if the citizens on the street rise up against the Muslim community, you're going to have chaos. And we're already starting to see that. You see the riots in Sweden. We saw the riots in France 2005. And we saw after the the two Muslims chopped the head off the British soldier a week before last outside of London in Woolwich, the citizens, the English Defence League and others are really angry and rising up. What you really need to see is the government do what it's supposed to do and step in and take control.
Well, we know that this is a philosophy hiding behind a religion, or at least they're trying to turn a philosophy into religion. So therefore, right now, they're getting by as religious freedom more than anything else.
Well, that's correct. But again, from my perspective, and when I say from my perspective, the facts of the issue, when we talk about this from like a war-fighting standpoint or from a counterterrorism standpoint, a law enforcement standpoint, as well as Christian and Jewish leaders in Europe interfacing with these individuals, this movement that we're seeing, and it's a global movement, which I think most of your viewers are pretty much aware if you watch 5 minutes of the news at night, is that this is not a religious issue. This is a totalitarian movement that seeks to rule. And it's that the back support of this, the backdrop behind this, their own documents, their own speeches, what they seek to do is impose a form of government on people. And that's not a religious cause. But you're right, they put the mantle of religion on top of this. Right.
So we're watching it unfold in America. Of course, most recently the Boston bomber and, of course, other incidences perhaps we don't even know about that never really make the news. Why are we slow to react to this? I mean, why are we allowing this to happen in America? And on top of that, it seems like we have an administration that's actually pushing it.
Well, a couple things. Those are some really big questions, and so I'll try to address them as best I can. But they're the right questions. The first thing is that this movement is here in the United States. The Muslim Brotherhood specifically has thousands of front organizations, and I'll just throw out a few so your viewers understand this is real. There was a trial in 2008 called the United States versus Holy Land Foundation, and I started to say the 1900s because the 1990s because this investigation began more than 15 years before it finally came to an end in 2008, where the case was the largest Hamas and terrorism financing case in the United States. The Holy Land Foundation, at the time it was indicted, was the largest Islamic charity in America. Its leaders were all indicted for sending millions of dollars to Hamas overseas. But the evidence laid out in this case demonstrated that there is a large Muslim Brotherhood movement here in the United States, that the most prominent Islamic organizations in America are part of that movement. Specifically, the Muslim Students Association, which, by the way, you guys have there at Oregon State and Oregon University and most of the major universities in Oregon. The Islamic Society in North America. You have Islamic societies, local Islamic societies, which are Muslim Brotherhood entities in Oregon. Many of the Islamic centers, which I believe there's one right there in Medford that's fairly new. Those are almost all of them, not every single one, but the vast majority of them are controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood, the Muslim American societies, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is actually a Hamas entity. So you have all these Muslim Brotherhood entities there. So when you ask why aren't we doing anything at the state and national level, the very Islamic organizations that the political and civil organizations are reaching out to in the Muslim community, those are Muslim Brotherhood entities exclusively.
Wow.
And so when they come to you with, as I said, with a suit and a smile, and they tell you whatever they tell you, which is generally untrue about what their true nature is, once we trust them, once individuals believe, well, this is a nice guy, I'm going to trust him, they've got you. And then they get you to walk down this road where whatever they say, you're going to take it face value because you're looking at them to be the experts in the Islamic community or the liaison between you and the Islamic community, whether you're a pastor, a rabbi, a police chief, the local the head of the FBI or DHS office. That's how they get this done.
All right. The other part of that question was, it appears that this administration is Islamic friendly. Can you comment on that?
Well, I think if you just look objectively at the policies that the current administration is enacting, very pro-Muslim Brotherhood, they're openly engaged internationally and at the U.S. level and at the regional level with only Muslim Brotherhood entities in the Islamic community. Clear pro-Hezbollah and pro-Iran, or at least neutral to Iran, but certainly I would argue pro-Hezbollah, which is very dangerous because there are numerous Hezbollah and Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps elements here in the United States. By doing this, we are emboldening them here in the United States. We have a very pro-Palestinian administration and very anti-Israel. I think you could say at the very best, we are certainly not supportive of Israel in the ways we need to be that will ensure their survival. Yeah. So yes, if you just look at it from a policy standpoint, and I will say this going back to the freedom of speech issue, the U.S. government currently is in support of policies that make defamation of Islam at a minimum something that the government's going after, but certainly looking at it from a in the future as being something that we may criminalize as a government. Wow. This directly contradicts our Constitution, and yet at the United Nations and in the State Department of the United States, those are the policies we're moving towards, and the very people we're working with to do it are Muslim Brotherhood leaders here in the U.S. Unbelievable.
It's called understandingthethreat.com, and what kind of resources do you have there, John, for people that go to your website?
Well, certainly have quite a bit of information and resources. I have an 80-minute DVD of the totality of the threat here in North America and the United States. We've got other things, write-ups of how to answer people who throw out the typical responses saying, well, this is crazy, this can't be happening. And in fact, what you're seeing in Europe, we have a lot of that here in the United States. It's not being reported. And then obviously my blog site that's right there. And I usually do 2 to 3 articles a week, and I encourage your viewers and your listeners to go to that.
All right, it's called understandingthethreat.com, and also be on the lookout for his book soon to be released in a couple of weeks, Raising a Jihadi Generation, and that'll be coming out. And I would assume that will be available at the bookstores, Barnes & Noble, and online at Amazon.
That's our hope. Yeah, certainly be able to Amazon.com and through the website.
All right. John, thank you so much. Let's stay in touch and get you back soon.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
appreciate
have a good day. Wow. All right. Well, as you know, the Supreme Court has now ruled that DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, is unconstitutional. What does that really mean? Well, our next guest is going to help clarify that, so stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Well, as you know, the Supreme Court has now made a decision that the Defense of Marriage Act, better known as DOMA, is unconstitutional, and as it relates to federal benefits. Now, what does this mean? And then it goes on to make no decision on Proposition 8 in California, which means the proposition appeal stands, at least as it is considered by some of the lower courts in that state. All of this is very confusing, but it also opens up the door for same-sex marriages to rapidly expand throughout the United States, even though over 30 states say that the definition of a marriage is between one man and one woman. I hold in my hand here a book entitled What is Marriage? Man and Woman, a Defense. And you can get this, I'm sure, online, and you may want to check that out. One of the co-authors and contributing authors is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Sherif Girgis, and he's also a student of philosophy at Princeton University and a JD candidate at Yale Law School, so pretty extensive with his education. Sherif, nice to have you with us, sir.
Nice to be here.
Well, yesterday was a big day when the Supreme Court ruled DOMA unconstitutional as it relates to federal benefits. What's your response to yesterday's decision?
Well, I think it's got a lot of problems. I mean, it leaves us space. The most important thing to see is that it does leave us space to continue to define marriage as the states see fit. It's not a Roe v. Wade on marriage. At the same time, it does plant the seeds for such a case, because it starts to say, it just attributes the DOMA support, and you can easily extend that to traditional state definitions, to animus, bigotry, that bear desire to harm or injure. It does that, of course, by not engaging with any of the arguments for DOMA or conjugal marriage laws. But that's a very significant precedent, and I think whether the court acts on it in the future will depend on what people do in the meantime.
All right. It made no decision on Prop 8 in California. Now, if I understand that correctly, Sherif, is that that means that the lower court ruling, not the Ninth Circuit, the District Circuit Court, but the lower court ruling, that appeal stands. Is that correct?
It's actually arguable. So
okay.
what we know for sure is that the Supreme Court didn't make any decision on it, and that the Ninth Circuit decision has to be set aside as well. What's unclear is whether that leaves the trial court one intact, or whether it actually requires that one to be vacated too, in which case couples would have to apply individually to get same-sex marriage licenses. Anyway, it's such a mess, but pretty much, especially with Kamala Harris and Jerry Brown as the administration there, it's pretty clear that there will be, most likely, same-sex marriage licenses in California pretty soon, and that there won't be an immediate effect on other states.
Yeah. All right. How does this affect children? I mean, to me, well, I'll hold my personal comments, but it appears now that this is such front and center conversation as it relates to family life that it's got to have an adverse effect on children.
Yeah, I think it does in a couple ways, or at least it would double down on trends that have already had an adverse effect, and that in fact had nothing to do with same-sex anything. So, just for example, a no-fault divorce. You know, everybody thought, well, that's not going to affect you or your marriage or anybody's kids or anything. It's just for high-conflict marriages, it would make it easier to get out. But in fact, it actually changed marriage to some extent for everybody. It made people more likely to keep their eyes on the exit ramp, which made them more likely to take it. And that undermined permanence to some extent for everybody, which hurt kids. But I think we'd be doubling down on that vision of marriage, that marriage is mainly about adult emotional union, not about the needs of children, that you should get out of it when you don't have the emotional union because that's inauthentic, to stick with it. You would also be adding a new lesson in our law, which is that moms and dads are interchangeable. And that lowers the motivations for people to stick with it for the kids and things like that. It really ends up undermining the norms of stability of marriage that make it so valuable to the common good.
You know, it just seems to me that the whole social argument of marriage now, it's going to make children at very young age to ask those questions. What is a gay marriage? What does this mean? I mean, normally they wouldn't be asking questions at young ages like that, but now that it's part of the whole social fabric, they begin to ask those kind of questions, and then those seeds are now planted into their little hearts and minds.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's no way of insulating ourselves from the culture, and that's why we all have a stake in how the culture goes.
Yeah, no question about that. So where do you see this argument going? I mean, there was an article today that says that those who are very happy about yesterday's decision, that this is the beginning now that their goal is all 50 states. Would you think that that's inevitable?
It's not inevitable. I think it really just depends on what happens between now and then. I mean, if the court thinks that it's going to get a huge blowback from that kind of decision, it's going to be more wary about it. And then the way we know that is yesterday. They had the chance to do that, and it's pretty clear that 5 justices are very sympathetic to the cause of redefining marriage. They did not because they didn't want another Roe v. Wade on their hands. Now, whether they think that will be a Roe v. Wade 5 years down the line depends, again, on whether supporters of this understanding of marriage stick up for their views.
Wow. All right. So, was it 30 states now still define marriage between a man and a woman? I would assume that those are going to be challenged, but can federal law trump state law on that issue?
Well, it's, you know, the challenge will be based on the Constitution. I don't think the Constitution has anything that contradicts these state laws. It doesn't take sides in the debate between which vision of marriage to enshrine in our law. And when it is just a debate between these two substantive visions, equality can't get you anywhere either. Equality says apply that vision on an equal basis once you figure out what it is. It can't tell you what marriage is or why we ought to recognize it.
All right, so, of course, your book deals with this, and the book is entitled, What is Marriage, Man and Woman, a Defense? And Sherif is one of the contributing authors to this. It appears to me that same-sex unions are certainly going to be here to stay as it relates to the receiving of benefits, and that seemingly is where all of this is going to end up going. Do you see states who still define marriage as a man and woman give way or be forced to give way to accept same-sex unions as it relates to benefits, both state and federal?
Well, I think there will be pushes for that, but, you know, the focus has really shifted away from civil unions in general. Because this debate isn't really for either side simply about practical benefits. I mean, if there are needs that people have in virtue of sharing a home, then we should make them available to anybody who shares a home, if they're not already available by private means. This is really for both sides a debate about what vision of marriage the state's going to enshrine in law.
Now, throughout your book, you pretty much warn that these decisions are certainly threatening marriage and weakening marriage, and to date, we see the effects of that. What do you see in the future as far as marriage is concerned?
I think we're definitely going to see a lot of legal challenges to state marriage laws, just as you say. We're going to see, and again, how they come out will depend on whether people buy the argument that this is inevitable, that they ought to shut up because it's all fixed anyway, or whether they stand up for their views in truth and in charity and with civility, and then but the other thing is we don't just fight a legal battle. I mean, the whole point of this is happy marriages and families, and that takes a lot more work than this. This is just preserving the conditions for us to be able to do that and to pass on our moral principles and so on.
Well, I'm concerned about that, obviously, and then the other thing is, I guess as it relates to children, same-sex couples who bring children into a relationship, or how this may affect the procedure in the future concerning adoptions into these same-sex marriages. I mean, this just really tears the traditional family apart.
Yeah, I think that it definitely undermines the stabilizing norms of marriage, and it suggests that there's nothing special about moms and dads, and there's nothing special about your own mom and dad in particular. That really consent is all that makes a marriage, or all that makes a family. And I think that in itself, though it has a kind of superficial appeal, ends up really undermining some of the ideals that make that have a very strong connection to the common good. Is
this battle over same-sex marriage, can it be categorized as a civil right? I mean, I know that's where they want it to be, but does it legitimately fit the description of a civil right?
No, I don't think so, because, civil rights, those are about equality. As we said earlier, equality isn't going to move you 1 inch towards either marriage policy here. People often make the comparison to anti-miscegenation laws, but bans on interracial marriage, in other words. But those were meant to oppress a particular minority. There's no way that the marriage as the union of a man and a woman was introduced to oppress anybody. First of all, it was introduced in every society independently. It was introduced it developed pretty organically, I think, in societies that had very favorable attitudes towards homosexuality, in societies with all kinds of religious and moral views. And there's just no way. They all thought, whatever they thought about same-sex anything, and even if they didn't, because they didn't have the concept of a sexual orientation, they thought that marriage was about bringing men and women together for family life.
Well, thank you for your work. And again, the book is entitled, What is Marriage, Man and Woman, a Defense? And you can pick it up online, I'm sure, at the bookstores. And even Dr. Rick Warren, Purpose Driven Life, has endorsed this book as a great read. So, Sherif, thank you for being with us. Keep up the good work, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel and I work at theDove TV. You know, compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Well, we're back and delighted to have back in the studio with us today Daniel Ogan. He is a consultant, a teacher, a counselor, a therapist, an artist, and he heads up the E-Agency, and just really enjoy his sweet spirit and his heart to help people. And Daniel, nice to have you back with us.
Thank you.
Good to see you. And first of all, you're going to be doing a workshop, and you're calling it Through the Storytelling and Arts for Life Transformation Workshops, better known as SALT.
Okay, this workshop is going to be a little different. This is going to be about the history of psychological theory.
Okay.
So, but with a twist, as I told you. Oh, and I wanted to say one thing.
Yeah.
Eric Epstein is the head. I work with him.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good.
I wanted him to know that.
Okay, well, got to keep all our protocols there in order. And now, you go to Russia quite often, and you didn't always do that, but there was a part of your life that took you to Russia, and we want to talk about, I guess, evangelism in Russia, somewhat at a post-Soviet era. But what took you to Russia in the first place?
Well, this was during 1993, I think. Mm-hmm. And there was an event in my life that absolutely, it was a tragic event. I had, at that time, called my bishop and said, you know, is there any place I could go for a couple of years and work within the church? And he said, well, I don't know if you want to do this. It's absolute chaos in Russia. I knew nothing about Russia. He goes, but, you know, that would be a good place. And coming from a place of great tragedy in my own personal family, mm-hmm. I went to Russia with a one-way ticket, no way back, and then I spent like the next 10 years there.
Really?
So what got me there was a tragic event in my life. It wasn't that I was interested that much in Russia. It could have been anywhere. It just so happens, I believe it was by God's grace,
sure,
that I ended in Russia.
All right, so what did you do? Did you work in the church there?
Yes. So any question you might ask is extremely complicated when we ask about did I work in the church, because
this is the Orthodox Church.
The Orthodox Church.
Right.
And it's kind of difficult to explain how that works. Mm-hmm. But I did, although I never before worked within the Orthodox Church. In fact, at that time, my orthodoxy was very surface. Mm-hmm. I had experienced it, but I had not given myself at all to it at all. I couldn't really say that I was a good Orthodox Christian, or a good Christian even. When I went to Russia, I was at a dark place.
Yeah, and God used it.
He did. He did.
And turned you around. What happened? What made you go from surface to heart and relationship?
Well, my third day I was in Russia, I was almost beat to death on the streets.
Well, welcome to town, huh?
Yeah, welcome to town. It was a wake-up call.
Wow.
I mean, it was my third day there, and it just woke me up, meaning that I knew I had to take being in Russia serious, because at that time it was, for me, for where I was at, a fairly dangerous place to be, because there was all kinds of chaos. We're talking about the collapse of the Soviet Union. Mm. And if you can imagine a collapse of a world power, now what does that mean? That means that all the agencies that they used to support, social work, teachers, the whole structure was collapsing. Mm. And so that left a vacuum, and there was, you know, to buy anything, to live was black market. And of course, I wasn't trained in this. Mm-hmm. I'm your normal American. And I get there in this complete chaos, and I was a fool, to tell you the truth. Mm. I dressed like an American. I was advertising. So after the third day, I thought, I better start taking this serious. And basically, that was the first step towards wisdom, so to speak.
Wow. So you got worked over on the streets.
Worked over badly, and I had a decision to make whether I was going to come back to the States or not. I didn't.
Mm-hmm. What was the condition of the churches, the Orthodox churches and the monasteries? What was the condition under the collapse of the Soviet Union? Were they in disarray as well, or were they pretty stout in their system?
No, they were well, in disarray. There was a great part of them that had been deteriorating. Okay, we're talking about 7 years of communist regime, mm-hmm. and they, dialectic materialism, basically is believing, hey, we're going to destroy from the face of our country our recognition of orthodoxy as part of our history. They were serious about it.
Wow.
They defaced churches, they used monasteries as insane asylums, they destroyed great works of art, and it was a very serious thing to eradicate it. They really believed it was a cancer in their society, and they were serious. And so when we're talking about the condition of the church, of course there was the underground church,
right,
which was extremely strong. But the structure of the church at that time, a lot of it was owned by different, I mean, you know, you'd go to a thing that used to be a cathedral and it might be an orphanage, or it might be a part of the university. They used these buildings not for churches but for secular uses. And
wow.
So things were completely in disarray.
So the condition of the church then had been shaken to its core. I would imagine that kind of separated the true believer from the surface believer by going through that kind of persecution.
It did. There was, of course, the underground movement, and then there was millions who were put in the Gulag, the Russian prison systems, for their faith.
Yeah.
Millions.
Just for wearing a cross.
Just for wearing a cross. I became best friends, in fact, the godfather of his child, a man named Alexander Ogaridnikov, who he had spent 10 years in the Gulag systems under horrible conditions. And so I happened to be there when a lot of these living martyrs, as Russian Orthodoxy calls them, were released from the prison systems, and it was my great privilege to be able to interview them. And of course, my question as a counselor was, how did you survive this? How did you survive them taking away your family, your reputation, your house? Everything was taken away. That knock in the 3 o'clock in the morning, you're taken away. No one sees you for 10 years. And then what you had to go through. How does somebody survive psychologically that, the worst kind of conditions?
So in that research, you find your own commitment because of their commitment.
Yes. In that research, it was a wonderful task, so to speak. It was eye-opening in many different ways. I saw people who at that time, you know, I wasn't, as I told you, that connected to Orthodox faith. To be honest, I had some of the same problems many Protestants might face about it. Mm-hmm. You know, I had questions. I was never a yes man. But going into true Russian Orthodoxy, it was the kindest, most open, and realistic faith. Because they weren't, when I was first there, no one tried to pull me into the churches. I was drawn towards it. I was drawn to talk to these people because that's one of the reasons I believed I was there, to try to understand my own tragedy in my life, to understand my own fallen nature and my own fight with darkness, you know, and what Christianity really meant in this world, in a real sense, street level, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. It's hard for me, I think for any of us in the Western world, to get our heart and head around somebody who was persecuted for 10 years for their faith. No other reason, just because they believed in Christ. And they were separated from their family, thrown into the Gulag in the most incredible conditions for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Basically being forced every day to renounce their faith, but they didn't. I just don't know if we can fully get that into our head and our brain, of what kind of a price tag that is for what you believe. I mean, I'm having a hard time processing it myself.
Well, put it in context. There's two levels. We could say, if you are a Christian, you could say it's demonic. Mm-hmm. If you are a historian, you could look at reasons how this happened, because the communists really, truly believed, dialectic materialism, that religion was the opiate of the people.
And that had to be eradicated.
And it had to be eradicated.
Right.
To make a new Soviet man.
Okay. All right. When we come back, I want to talk about how do you go from that kind of a condition into actually evangelizing people. And Daniel Ogan's with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Well, we're hearing a fascinating story with my good friend Daniel Ogan today. He's a counselor, and people that want to maybe get a hold of you for counseling, I know that's what you do. That's what the Lord's got you involved in. What do they do? How do they get a hold of you? Because you work with various groups and individuals, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I work with, it's not a strict Christian counseling service. I mean, I work with anybody.
Right.
Although, you know my heart. I
Right.
mean, I'm always going towards that direction.
Yeah.
But there's an email right there.
Okay, Daniel at theeagency.net. That's how you'd get a hold of him. Daniel at theeagency.net. That's all one word. All right, we're talking about his experience in Russia, and right at the fall of the collapse of the Soviet Union, those who have been thrown in the gulag for their faith, the whole infrastructure of the country is trying to find its way, and the church has been persecuted. In fact, it was deemed to be eradicated. It's amazing. You just can't turn God's light out, can you? You just can't do it. Did that ever create a hunger in that culture for truth?
Yes. What was happening is there was a vast underground spiritual Christian movement within the Orthodox faith. In fact, I would say it was their version of, you could use this word, revival.
Revival. Kind of like in China.
Yes.
Yeah. The underground churches.
The underground church was incredible.
Yeah.
And a lot of young people. There was a tremendous thirst. When I got there, there was a tremendous thirst. And when we're going to be talking about evangelism, yeah. How does Orthodoxy evangelize?
Yeah, especially when the government's there to take you out. How do you evangelize?
Well, now that's an interesting question, because since the Orthodox tradition within the church is you have what you call brotherhoods and sisterhoods. These were the militant, so to speak, arm of the church. They always have been. They're the ones who built the churches. They were the iron workers, the artists, the evangelists, who would be out there talking to people, bringing people in, and they were blessed by the priest and the patriarch to do this. And so let's just say that you and I were in the Orthodox Church. We're laymen. We don't want to be in the priesthood, but we want to do the right thing. We want to use our life, for Christ.
Right.
We go to our priest, we say we would like to start a brotherhood, and he would ask us many questions, and when they would bless a brotherhood, that was a sacrament in the church. That was a serious deal. You go up and you are called to give your life for Christ.
In that area.
In that area.
Yeah, service.
Now, what happened is that Patriarch Alexei, who was patriarch then, we submitted a petition to him for the status of brotherhood. And so, by God's grace, through Patriarch Alexei, which was impossible to get, he gave us his blessing and a signed document that we could start a brotherhood in Moscow.
We being who? You and some friends? And
me, some young people in the church, about 4 of us.
Really?
And yeah, and it was like, we're talking street level. We went out on the street, and how we did that was, at that time, when we're talking about the collapse of the Soviet Empire, hundreds of thousands of people had lost their jobs, had lost economics. We are talking about Armageddon for these people.
Right.
You know, and
nothing.
Right. And I know that I was brought up thinking that about the rapture. When things get too bad, there will be the rapture. The Russians will say, I know you're from America, and things get bad there, you guys are going to have the rapture, but what happened to us? Why didn't God care about us? We went through, millions of us died. Our whole world has collapsed, and there was no rapture.
Wow.
Nobody came. I mean, you know, people seeing their grandmother, grandfathers taken away. I mean, we can't even imagine this.
Yeah. And die.
And die. And so
what's your message, Daniel? What's your message to these people? I mean, how do you, what do you say?
Okay, first of all, I
didn't
have a message.
Okay.
They gave me a message. I would never be so presumptuous to believe that I had a message to these people at all. What I had was just a broken heart and wanting to serve Christ. That's all I had. I had no message. I had no prepackaged message. So by God's grace, we started this brotherhood, and we started getting money to buy food and medicine. And we went to the street and gave out food, clothing, and medicine. And I wish you could have pictures of this. We'd have hundreds, thousands of people in line. I can give you one story of how difficult it was there on the street. I saw a young family coming up every day, a man and a wife, 2 little daughters, 7 and 8. One day, the 2 girls came. Mom and Dad weren't there. We go, where's Mom and Dad? And they said, last night we saw our mother and father beat to death by the police. Their heads broken open.
Oh, God.
Now, the question went through my mind, what could you say to these young girls? What message would you give them? You know, think about this really. You know, generally what went through my mind was, what hallmark phrase, you can't.
There is none, yeah.
But that is a taste of the reality that was happening around us. And, but through that, evangelism took place. Now, we never stood on a street corner and preached Christ. It's like St. Francis said. He said, always preach the gospel and sometimes use words.
Right.
We were using what we had, and literally hundreds of young people started, hey, we want to help. We want to be part of this. Here they come. And we had like the Orthodox...
You preached through service.
Through service. Through the catechism. We had all these young people come, and the church had given us a building right in the center of Moscow, which is impossible to get, and we started giving catechisms. Young people started getting baptized, you know, and going through the church, and then being part of the brotherhood.
Wow. Today, now you've been back, you came back to the United States, you've been back and forth, you say you and your wife go there in the summers. Is it different?
It's absolutely different. Absolutely different.
Because the church survived?
The church survived.
Right.
You know, we do not think of Western culture as a virus. It is. The first time I was walking down Stary Arbat, Old Arbat Street in Moscow, and I heard from a kiosk rap music played. It was the first time. It just came to me, oh my gosh, what are we bringing here to Russia? When the doors opened, it opened up to Western culture, and the worst of Western culture, which is another form of materialism.
Right.
That went in there. I mean, right now in Moscow, what's different is their economy is just absolutely booming. It's the center of you know, it's Eastern Europe, but the center of Eastern Europe economy, and it is absolutely vibrant. But that has done, unfortunately, that has been a positive thing.
All right, so the church goes through persecution, survives, the Soviet Union, the fall of it, and then you get, you're calling it the Western virus comes in, which is a two-edged sword. It brings with it a lot of capitalistic thinking and maybe even opportunities, but also brings it with a part of the culture that you don't want to see. And I would assume at that point, then the culture is no longer, I mean, the church is no longer looked upon as something as sacred or needed.
For many young people, that's a very good observation. That's an excellent observation. Although there is a very strong renaissance and revival within the Orthodox Church. It's strong.
Right.
It's extremely strong, and the churches are packed. Every time I go there and I go to an Orthodox church, you hardly can get into the church.
Yeah, by the way, it's not only in Russia, it's throughout Europe, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there is a hunger, but you're seeing a differentiation between black and white. It's very clear.
So, does evangelism still take place there now?
Of course. And their form of evangelism, of course, is different. It's mostly an evangelism of what you do. It's the evangelism of mercy, as they call it. Evangelism is thought of as part of the liturgy in our church. I mean, we don't just go to the liturgy, but part of the liturgy is to go out and take the message to the world. That's the other side of the liturgy. It's not a closed service. And so, yes, there is there still is a great renaissance there in Russia.
Daniel, I only got about a minute and a half left here. It appears now the Western Church in America is really being squeezed. It's no longer about specific issues, whether, you know, recently in the last day or so it's been the whole same-sex issue, Supreme Court and all that, the abortion issue, and those are all very important. I'm not minimizing the, but what appears to be on the line here in the Western culture is religious freedom. Are we going to be able to believe what we believe without the government telling us you can't believe that? And Russia went through that. There's some lessons there that may be coming here for us to take a look at.
Absolutely correct. The same thing that happened to Russia is happening to America in a different form, but the end result is the same.
It's called religious freedom.
Religious freedom is being questioned here, yes.
Thanks for sharing your heart and your story.
Thanks, Perry, for having me here.
Yeah, and best to you. And again, if you want to get a hold of Daniel, it's Daniel at the E-Agency. E is an Ed, theeagency.net. He is a counselor, and you may want to check out his workshop coming up in about a week or so. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us, and look forward to having you back. Come back.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll see you next time.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. And you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us.